Alex walked away from the agency model, built a SaaS title capture from scratch, and over the next decade quietly dominated his niche. Serving 1,000 title agencies, he beat legacy players and captured 10% of the market, all while bootstrapping.
So many people told me, oh, this is so great, this is awesome. And then we built it, nobody was using them. And we're like, what the hell happened with awesome?
So what happened? He had an 8-figure exit without investors or a massive team. Just a founder who understood one thing better than anyone else.
You're never solving the problem of the customer. They will solve their problem by doing these jobs. All you're doing is you're enabling those customers to get the job done through your product.
Today, Alex walks us through the entire playbook, how he spotted the opportunity, how he validated it, and how he competed against giant competitors who had been there for decades.
Understanding the value curve and what's important for your particular ideal customer is the path to being able to create really spectacular products. It's when people tell you, shut up and take my money.
But here's where it gets interesting. He also talks about something most people don't, the phase after you get product market fit.
Founders between 50K MRR and 150K MRR go through this phase, which I call the big squeeze or the pressure zone. It's the worst part of building a business. Your revenue goes up like this, but your problems go up like this.
The pressure zone, where 8 out of the 10 successful founders quit. If you're running an agency and thinking about making the jump, or you're already building a SaaS, then this is the conversation you need to hear. All right, let's get into it. I am Victor, and this is SaaS Mastery. Alex, my friend, good to have you here.
Good to be here, man.
I've always loved stories like yours. You know, the quiet bootstrap founder who takes on these massive, slow-moving software companies and, just over time wins. And so you didn't raise a ton of money. You didn't have a huge team. You just built something that's cleaner, faster, easier to use, right? In an industry that was still running on what I guess looked like 1990s software. And with time, that turned into real traction. You captured a 10% slice of a massive market, and eventually you had an 8-figure exit this year. So, congratulations on that. And
Thank
so
you.
it's one of those beautiful founder stories where simplicity and persistence just beats the flashy stories. So we'll get into all of those lessons. But first, let's go back to the beginning, before title capture. That was the name of the software company. Basically, but we'll also get into that, a quoting tool for title companies. You were running a consultancy, right? A software house?
Yeah, well, I mean, the story's a little goes a little bit further back. I've always been a designer. I've always been designing things. I actually started with graphic design. If you talk, there's so many other people I share this with, like Brian Chesky of Airbnb, Kyle Rackett from Proposify. There's so many people who have started out as designers. So I initially started out as a designer. I worked for an agency. I did a lot of, pretty progressive design at that time. It was 2001. And we were doing a lot of website design, newsletters. A lot of people might remember how it used to be. And then I think it was 2009 or so. By that time, already met my co-founder, Keith. And in 2009, we decided to start building more than just websites. We started going into building software for people. Right, so we were kind of like your typical outsourced agency, back in those days. So that's
Cool.
kind of how we started.
Classic route. How
Yeah.
do you decide to build your own product then? Was that something you were already looking to do and searching, or did you just stumble into it?
Well, again, it's back to being a very creative type of person. And, by the way, I really believe that the best founders are founders who are actually designers or product people first, who then learn to be good at marketing, be good at sales. That's typically, and the reason for that is that you're always focused on solving somebody's problem, on designing something that really helps and brings value.
Caring about the outcome, right?
Exactly, right. You're essentially a glorified people pleaser if you want to, think in those terms. But yeah, I think that designers have a really good shot at being successful entrepreneurs when they make the switch. As to your question, what exactly, determined us to go into, building our own product? I think that, agencies are not a very scalable, type of business, not a very scalable model. And typically what happens is that if you want to grow, you need to throw more people at the problem. Like the more you want to grow, the more people you need to employ and so on and so forth. And then we also had this sort of uncertainty about what the next project will be. It always felt like we were starting from scratch, step one. And then we decided, listen, if instead of, building, all these products for other people, why don't we just build a product for ourselves? And so that was, it was just a natural sort of progression from two people who actually valued freedom and valued personal challenge and valued achievement. It was just natural that we wouldn't just, sort of just be okay with where we were. We just wanted more. It's just, I think that's one of the traits that a lot of successful entrepreneurs have, is to just constantly want more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's almost every agency owner, I think, especially a software house or not, has been thinking about launching their own product. But the biggest challenge that software founders have, right, software house founders or service consultants, is that they know how to build a product, at least in theory. As a designer, I think you already had that edge because a designer is essentially a product person. Developers have it a bit harder because even though they know how to develop something, they don't always know how to think like a product person, right? But still, what you're lacking is usually market insight, right? Now, there's a lot of ways how you can learn that market insight. So what was it for you? How did you find your niche, find your product?
Well, I think that, being a product person, I don't think you could be a good product person without understanding people and understanding how markets actually work. So you're correct. You need the market insight into a very specific market with a specific need. But I think as a principle, if you're going to be a good product person, you might have to just understand where people come from. And so, I was always focused, and to this day, I'm always fascinated by the jobs that people need to get done. Okay. A lot of people are talking about, well, my product solves this problem, my product solves that problem. I think that's just a false way of looking at things. I don't know where it comes from. I think it's just the lingo now. And it's been like that for perhaps 15 or 20 years coming from Silicon Valley, but I think it's just wrong. And it's inexact. It's not wrong, it's inexact. Because people typically have problems or have desired outcomes, but they have to do certain jobs to get to that outcome, to solve that problem. You're never solving the problem of the customer. They will solve their problem by doing these jobs. All you're doing is you're enabling those customers to get the job done through your product or through your service. So naturally, being very curious and, also obviously we were looking for, at this point, we were looking to build our own product, right? So we were searching and we were paying very close attention to everything that came our way. So, but again, I was very focused on the jobs that people needed to do. And when one particular customer, I remember in 2013, came to us, it was the largest title company in Florida. So when they came to us and they said, well, listen, we would like to pay, obviously, a lot of money for you to build us a quoting tool, right? A quoting app. When they came in to say that, well, I naturally was like, well, okay, wait a second. So they're willing to spend a lot of money with this type of product. Okay, so why? Okay, well, because they need to disclose their rates and fees to their real estate agents and to their lenders. And then it just clicked. And we were like, okay, wait a second. If these people who are pretty large, if they need this and they're willing to pay a lot of money for it, then this job is important to them. And if it's important to them, it might be important to a lot of other people in the industry. Okay, so that's when we decided to go back to them and tell them, listen, why don't we, well, you guys have two options. You can pay us this much money and you're going to own it and we build it for you and that's that. Or we build it, with our own money, with our own resources. You don't have to pay, but we'll own it. And you guys are just going to pay a monthly, very low fee to use it. Okay. Evidently, they said yes to the second option. And that was basically, what got things started. So it was the intuition that the job that they're trying to get done with the product that we were supposed to build for them was a job that was ever present, in the title industry. And, obviously our intuition was correct.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think any software house or consultancy, when somebody comes to you and they're willing to pay what probably the aggregated 10-year SaaS fees for a product to have it custom built for them, or even more, that's a pretty strong indicator that this is an important problem for them to solve. Now,
yeah, and just to push on that, I think being an agency, we're kind of using the term agency and people might get confused that we're talking about marketing agencies. Being a software, house, the way you're phrasing it being that puts you in a very, very unique position to understand what really matters to people, because whatever they're willing to build is important. They wouldn't be spending money, they wouldn't be spending time if this wasn't an important thing. And so you are just passively getting a lot of market insight and a lot of opportunities, right? But if you don't have the correct principles to assess what's coming your way, because sometimes people will spend money on dumb shit. So it's, it is what it is. So you also have to have these principles, these filters to understand if what they're asking, what they're trying to do makes sense throughout the industry. And if this is a good opportunity for you to get involved, own it and build it and just create a product out of it.
Okay. So I do want to talk about those filters that you mentioned. One of the thoughts that I have immediately is that must really be important for them, right? But how do I make sure, and we've seen those with our own clients, that what you're building isn't just important to that particular company. Sometimes that happens because of let's say, specific way how they operate that will be very valuable to them, but not to others, or that this is that not even the specific way they're solving the problem, but just the problem even is very unique to them and others don't care. How do you validate that this is not a unique problem at that point?
Yeah, well, there's only one way. Not that there's one way, there's actually a series of things that you need to do, right? Like whenever you want to build something, typically what you do is you have a hypothesis, like for example, in our case, the hypothesis would have been, okay, well, we believe that many title companies in the United States have a hard time disclosing their fees or giving out quotes to the real estate agents or lenders, okay? Or at least we would say, well, that's a very important job. They all have to do it. And there's room there for us to come up with something better to help them better do it. Okay. Save time, save money, whatever. So you start with the hypothesis, but really that's just, that's just the starting point. What you need to do then is make sure that you talk to as many potential customers as possible. And what you need to do is you need to understand their particular use case, their particular circumstances, right? Understand what is the size, but really you want to understand the process behind doing or getting that job done, okay? For example, in our case, well, how does the request from the agent come in? Do they send it via email? Do they call you on the phone? When do they call you? Do they call you on the Monday? Do they call you on the weekend? There's a lot of interesting stuff that you learn by diving deeper into every little part of what the current process looks like, right? And so you want to talk to as many people as possible. That will definitely tell you if most people don't have to do this job, and these people that came to you with this idea are just crazy, or like they're just in a little very small limited niche, which I don't have a problem with necessarily. I'm okay with niches. Riches are in the niches, but talking to people and doing what's called customer discovery or customer research, that gives you a lot of information for you to be able to assess if this is something worthwhile. And worthwhile means that, well, what I typically look for is jobs that the majority of the market has to do, okay? Like, for example, in the title industry, the quoting or giving out quotes to real estate agents or lenders is something 100% of title companies have to do. It is it's the initial step of the closing process. No real estate transaction, no order comes in before these quotes are given out, and the consumers, the buyers and the sellers, understand exactly what they're going to spend money with when the closing comes, right? So this is a must-do type of job, okay? So evidently, you don't want to build businesses for jobs that are very, very small. You want to build business for jobs that are widely present in your market, right? And then what you do while doing the customer research, you start seeing these different sort of subcategories of your customers, where again, a lot of people are going to tell you, well, depending on the depending on the customer size, number of employees, bullshit. It's based on use case, right? You look at the processes. If they all look the same, I don't care if this is a 20 employee company or a 2,000 employee company, right? There's going to be some particularities, but if the process looks the same, it's good for everybody, But if I go through my analysis and I talk to I typically want to talk to at least 30 different customers, but if I go through them and I start seeing very different processes going on at the same time and the whole thing looks very, very different, then I'm going to have to make a decision on what exact category or subspecies am I going to focus on, because I'm not going to be able to be everything for everybody. And I think that's one thing that many startup and early stage founders miss out on. Is the reason why 90% of them fail, because they're trying to go too wide and be everything for everyone, and the product is really nothing for anyone. It's like that quote from Brian Chesky, which I mentioned earlier, who says that it's better to have 100 people love you than 1,000,000 people sort of like you, right? Mm-hmm. That's the whole point. But again, a lot of early stage founders are kind of afraid of leaving money on the table. They think that if they go very narrow and pick their niche, they're going to be leaving so much money on the table, which is completely incorrect. First of all, if you don't do that, you have no shot at getting off the ground in your startup phase. No shot, because you're going to have to do two things. You're going to have a very high conversion and a very low churn. And unless your product is God's gift to humanity for those people, you're not going to get those two KPIs in line. So you're not going to have product market fit. And then once you have that, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to build the company to scale it if you're dealing with a very, very insulated kind of specific customer, and you don't have to juggle chainsaws to make it work, right? Mm-hmm. And then of course, later on, if you really want to expand, you always have two options. You either go for more niches and make the product perfect for them as well, right? So you grow horizontally, or you stay within that very limited niche and then you just build more value, more products, more services, and then you grow vertically, right? But you're never leaving money on the table. But the problem is they risk not getting off the ground at all. So
right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So I need to go in and find a large enough coherent ICP within the broad target audience that looks similar or needs the same product, where it's a really big pain for them. How would you go out and find those at least 30 people that you want to talk to, those sample size? What's your best way here?
Well, I mean, there's so many ways. Obviously the first way is just by networking. So you might have a friend, you might have a couple of friends. Hey, for example, if you want to get involved in dentistry, which I'm talking from experience because my new venture is in that field. But, I have a co-founder who's a world-class, renowned dental surgeon. Obviously, he has a lot of friends that I can just talk to. Okay, so that's the easiest thing. If you're not, there's this concept of founder market fit that a lot of people overlook. I care about it, especially because I'm a sort of a market agnostic founder. So other than, for SaaS founders, which, okay, I'm part of that world. Like anything I build for SaaS or for entrepreneurs in general, yeah, okay, fine. I've got the founder market fit. But other than that, I don't have that. So, you either learn the ropes and it kind of takes you a long time, which I did with Title Capture, or you partner with a founder who has that fit, who's from that world. right? It's going to be very easy for you to get connected to the people and have the right conversations. Now, if you don't have that, well, you have friends, right? Talk to one guy who might be, the right fit. You talk to him and then you ask them, hey, can you introduce me to a couple more people that I could talk to? And he's going to do that, right? And you talk to those two people and then you ask each one of them if they can introduce you and so on and so forth. And then you just got to grow your network, right, temporarily to the amount of people you got. The other way to do it is like you have a lot of communities online. So, you go on LinkedIn, you go on Facebook, there's so many communities, there's private communities that are not even on social media. And, you could always get people there who are willing to kind of help you out, give you some feedback, give you some insight, answer your questions. So it's really about being social. It's getting out there, out of the building and talking to people. It's like some 101 skill.
Totally. I think you mentioned at some point that a trade show did very well for you early on for title capture, right? I think that's an easy way, low-hanging fruit to just get to talk to people without being overly salesy and get some feedback.
Yeah. Well, I think the trade show was not necessarily for us to do customer research. So here's the deal. When you're building a product, okay, whether it's a new product or a new feature, okay, of course, everybody should go through the customer research, discovery phase, right? You got to talk to people. But the moment you have the information, the moment you have like the idea of what the product should look like, now you go through the validation phase. And I think there's only two options when it comes to validation, and both of them involve a wallet, right? The first option is this. If the product does not take you a long time to build, right, and a lot of money, right, so there's not a lot of stuff involved in getting the product out there, I think you just go for it. Get the product out there, and then you get the validation and see if people are willing to buy, okay? And of course, you're going to talk to them, and you're going to pivot, and it's all good, right? The whole idea is to preserve momentum. Now, the second option is where you do want to do validation up front before building it, because most likely the product will take a lot of money and a lot of time to build. And the last thing you want is commit a lot of resources and then, having crickets. The way you do it in that particular case is you try to pre-sell. So you go to people, you show them your idea, you show them the prototype, and then of course, there's going to be some negative feedback. You're going to take that into account, perhaps pivot a little bit. But every time people tell you, well, this is so good, I'm going to use it. This is great. Okay, cool. So if you like it, here's the deal. We've got an early adopter program, okay? And you're going to have, these benefits. By the way, the product's going to be out there in 9 months, and it's going to cost this much. And if you sign up as an early adopter, you're going to have these benefits, and it's only going to cost you a flat fee for me to sign you up into the program. Would you be willing to do that? And if they say yes, then that is validation, okay? Words are cheap, right? Words without them taking out their wallet and paying you are not something you should take into account when doing your validation. I've been in through situations where so many people told me, oh, this is so great, this is awesome. And then we built it. It was really just features. And we built them, and it's like nobody was using them. And we're like, what the hell happened with awesome, And then we went back to those people. It's like, the product's great. It looks great. But, we don't really use it that much. Like, why couldn't you say that in the beginning? But people want to be polite and don't want to be rude and want to be, sort of come off as being rude and so on. And so they kind of tell you what they think you expect to hear, right? But so when it comes to validation, you really just have those two paths, right? And we went down the first one because the product didn't take, it took me, who I wasn't really a seasoned developer. I wasn't the best developer. Obviously, I did code back in those days. But it took me like 3 or 4 weeks to just build it. And it just made zero sense for us to just go and try to validate before building. And let's just build it. And we built it. We already had a booth booked at the annual sort of trade show. So it's like, let's do it. It's not a big deal. We'll figure it out, if it sells or not, and we're going to actually get honest opinions. So that's what we ended up doing.
And I presume you did.
And that's why we were at the trade show. The trade show was like we had the product. It was done. So now it was time to sort of see if people would sort of bite and if they would appreciate it. But given all our sort of product experience, and understanding how important the job is and understanding all the use cases and all that type of stuff, it was like, I had zero doubt that this wouldn't be something that people would want to pay for. It just had very practical value.
Because a lot of people say, all right, so validation, especially, pre-product validation, when you just have a prototype or a presentation, it's like, well, X amount of people saying yes, a wait list is big, but it's like, it's $1 value. If I feel like enough people have prepaid, that means they'll use it later on. Hopefully, right? No guarantee, but they should. They're more likely to. That for you is validation, and we can start building it. I mean, today, right, with all of the AI tools, building a prototype that you can at least show to people, right? Easier than ever.
Dude, you don't even have, like, it's people overcomplicate the prototype thing. Like, here's the funny story. I went from like building something like in Bootstrap and using like CS, whatever, like back in the day. Then I went to just like clickable designs, because it was just a lot faster. Nowadays, the way I validate an idea, it's just pictures. Like I literally scroll right. And it's not clickable, it's not anything. The most I would do is I would just create like a Canva presentation if I really need to kind of like insert a little pitch in there, just like for visuals. But it's just like, listen, okay, this is how it's going to work. You see it? Okay, that thing does this, that thing does that. Okay, boom.
But you're
and
also
it's like
a designer.
5 slides. Yeah.
That's easy
and
for you.
And it's 5 product screenshots. And I want to just understand that they get the core functionality. Sure. And it's something like people overdo. They spend 2 months, in Figma and building the clickable prototype. And it's like, bro, no. You have an idea today. You should be able to illustrate it bare bones today. Okay. Right. So if you're a product person, if you're an entrepreneur, and this is something I've been talking to a lot of people about, I think that especially in software, even if you're not a designer, if you're not a developer, obviously, you should, as a founder, have Figma skills to a certain level. It should be sort of like a native language because it's going to allow you so easily to sort of illustrate what's in your head and help you get the vision that you have, get it out there. Now, okay, either Figma or, I sometimes even skip Figma. I use Miro, for prototyping.
Wireframing.
But my Miro wireframes look better than some people's Figma designs. That's a different story, But the whole point is just to be able to illustrate what's in your head and put it in front of people fast. Because, we were lucky, our idea worked. But a lot of people don't have the same luck and they have to iterate quite a lot, right? So this whole process, you should be able to have a lot of ideas and you should be able to say no to 99% of them. That's sort of the creative process. You put out a lot of creative, you pull out a lot of art, and you should be willing to throw away 95% of it. The same thing goes here. You should really want to go through a process where you go through at least 10, 15 different opportunities that make sense before you start the business, where you've shortlisted and eliminated absolutely each and every single one of them that did not feel right. Mm-hmm. And the one that you end up going forward with is the one that checks all the boxes possible. But for you to be able to do that, for you to be able to iterate on 10 different, 10, 15 different opportunities, you have to be able to illustrate your ideas quite fast and then also go through that sort of validation process with people. I think that's the important skill for founders and entrepreneurs.
I would 100% agree. The only thing that I would add is that, especially if somebody really doesn't have those design skills, I feel like what wasn't possible even 2 years ago, today is possible, where instead you really just prompt something out within a couple of hours, right? That's like the threshold. Don't spend more time. It's like the same amount of time you would use on a Figma thing. And sometimes being able to show something that actually works, it was nonsense when you had to spend like a month and tens of thousands of dollars to do it, but you don't anymore. I feel like that can be equally valuable.
Well, let me tell you, sure, but can you draw like pen and paper? And then here's something else. Like the quickest sort of validation that I did was I think it was last year. I was still obviously in title capture, but I was, heavily into negotiations, because the reason I exited was because I had all these other projects that I wanted to kind of go into and so on. So it was just time to sort of switch into a higher gear. But the quickest validation was I was at a dental sort of conference. I was on the on the escalator with a guy, and I was like, hey, so if I gave you a product that did whatever your XYZ does, but it had this and it cost this, would you switch? And he's like, yeah. So I didn't even have to design anything. It's like, dude, listen, this is what I'm trying to sell you. This is what I'm trying to kind of compete, with. And so I think that the risk here is to just get tangled into the little minutia of design and how it looks like and how, when the reality is that a great product just delivers more value. And I think the conversation has to always be around the value, the extra value that it delivers.
Mm-hmm. Let's go into that extra value and pivot a bit more into product or even business strategy. And we're going to talk about your new dental venture too, but let's use title capture as an example here. Again, where you went into a market where you had large established but somewhat outdated competitors. Would you say, I think that's a lot of people are facing this. Actually, a lot of people come to us and they say, I want to build something better in my industry, but there's like X established vendor everybody's using. We hate them, but everybody's using them. Would you say that that's an opportunity as opposed to a threat? And would you say that just better UI, easier to use software, is that actually a selling point? Or is that just, at the end of the day, sure, it's nice that something's easier to use, but does that make me switch?
Yeah, well, I don't think design or usability alone is a selling point necessarily. I think that what's important to understand, well, first of all, I love competition. I think that, everybody's quoting that book, Blue Ocean Strategy, which might have been great like decades ago, but I just don't think it makes any sense because it says, well, don't compete. Don't go into red oceans. Try to find a blue ocean where you're basically, what they're trying to say is like the best position you could be in when you start is when you create a new category of products, right? So there's a job that people do. They typically do it through these categories of products. Now you should sort of DJ your way into combining a lot of stuff and just creating a new category. Listen, fine, that's great. You're going to stand out, but that doesn't spare you from then having to compete. First of all, you're competing with all the other categories of products, okay? So you're still in the red ocean, even if you created a new category.
Probably always compete with like Excel, right?
Right. And then the second thing is the moment you create the first iteration, the first product, there's going to be some moron coming in, copying you, right? It's like, oh, that's such a great idea. Let me create one myself. And now you have a direct competitor, right? Not just indirect ones. So it's like, whatever. So I love competition because it validates the fact that there's demand, okay? When there's no competition, it just means that, it might be that you're barking up the wrong tree, That's basically the way to put it. But when you're trying to create, the whole point is this: find a very well-defined category of people who have to do a really important job, right? That helps them get to a certain desired outcome and helps alleviate a problem, but they have to do an important job. And when you understand that job, your goal as an entrepreneur is to provide them the absolute best possible solution to enable them to do it. Okay? That's your goal. Okay, that's the path. That's where you're trying to aim, right? Now, how do you create the best possible product? Well, you talk to your people, you talk to your audience, and you're trying to determine, by looking at their use cases, you're trying to determine their value curve. Okay, the value curve are all the things that are important to them, really important to them when having to do that job. So I'm going to give you an example. If you're talking to small your SMBs, whatever, generally, affordability is going to be on the value curve. No doubt about it. Ease of use is probably going to be on the value curve. If they're also moving around a lot and they're like out and about and working while being mobile, evidently, mobile accessibility is going to be higher on the value curve. Okay. If you're going to sell to enterprise companies, you're going to have compliance, you're going to have data security, you're going to have customization. Like those things are going to be important on the value curve, right? When you look at all their processes and the use cases, these things will start becoming evident. You would be surprised at how many of these items existing solutions miss out on. Okay, you'll be surprised. The reason for that is a lot of the incumbents are well-established companies that move very, very slow. Okay, and the environment does change. Your life does change. And processes change. But somehow these companies manage to kind of stay stuck in the way things were, used to be done like 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So all you have to do is really understand these value curve points and make sure that your product hits every single one of them. You don't even have to look at the competition. Now, of course, if you want to pitch your product, it's better to understand if you're trying to switch someone from an existing solution to yours, then of course you need to understand what that solution looks like and the frustrations, and then sell them on the outcome of what it would look like, what it would feel like to use your product, But I think that, so again, perhaps design, perhaps usability is on the value curve, but it's not always a thing, okay? There's so many products that look terrible, but people just can't let go of them because they're just hitting the right spots that truly matter for these people. So understanding the value curve and what's important for your particular ideal customer, not for everybody, for the ideal customer, what's important to them when having to do this job is the path to being able to create really spectacular products that when people, and again, when you have that type of product, it's when people tell you shut up and take my money. And that's it. You don't want to go for less feedback than that. It's like, are they fucking falling off out of their seats? Or it's just like, this is interesting. No, that shit sucks. If they tell you it's interesting, it's terrible. If they tell you, oh, wow, like just take my money, give it to me, I want to move with it. And again, the only way to get to that is when you understand what are the 5, 6, 7 different things that are very important to them, and the product just hits right there. It understands them better than they understand themselves. How much time they have, how much resources, how many people are working on this, all those things. You got to be very, very well attuned to all these little details that have to do with their workflow, their process, their use cases.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there's a lot of opportunity, in short, a lot of opportunity. Even if there's competition, you should never be afraid of competition.
Right, because the product is always misaligned with at least some subset of their target market. Right.
100%. And again, you don't go into, see, this is the thing, like when you decide to, one of the criteria that you should sort of shortlist using, remember I told you like you should have 10, 15 different opportunities, different hypotheses, if you will. There's a few criteria that you need to utilize to figure out which one makes sense and which one doesn't. But one criteria is to kind of find what's called a white space. Now, a lot of people, so you have to have two things going on. There's a white space, meaning that's your niche, and there's a big market where obviously you have room to expand into, okay? But the white space isn't, a lot of people are sort of, misunderstanding the white space as being some completely virgin, area where there's no competitor, there's no product. It's 2025. That shit doesn't exist anymore. Okay, maybe it existed in Paul Graham's days, but in 2025, there's nothing like that. A white space simply means that you found a niche, a sub-segment of your audience who has to do a job where there's very few alternatives, very few products, and most of them are not in great shape. Okay? And it would be easy for you to gain traction really, really fast. Mm-hmm. That's what a white space is.
Okay. Let's keep talking about expansion because you just mentioned you're building a new tool in the dental space, right? And interestingly enough, I know you tried a couple of things, but interestingly enough, that this is what's stuck, and it's also as far as I understand, a quotation tool, just this time for the dental industry, right? At least that's what you're starting with. So I know you're a big fan of a strategy called land and expand. So what do you mean by that?
Well, it's the only way you build a business. And again, I mentioned that you should always focus on a niche, right? Mm-hmm. So expanding, okay, first of all, there's three phases in a company's life, if you will, in the growth journey when it comes to sort of product revenue, right? You've got the startup phase where you're trying to get product market fit, where you're trying to find the niche, find the audience and the job and the product combination where you find it's a great fit. They're converting, you retain them. So once you get out of that phase, now it's time to go on a land grab. Land grab means, okay, you got the product, it's validated, you got product market fit. Now it's time to put it in front of as many people in that niche as possible, okay? Now, that thing is going to take quite a while, right? And at some point, what's going to happen is you're going to have a harder time growing by just getting new customers, right? In a way, you've sort of saturated, you've outgrown your niche potential. That's typically, I don't want to throw like a number. In some markets, it might be like 10% penetration. In some markets, it might be 15, 20% penetration. That's very optimistic. But either way, you gotta figure out that you've got it to a place where everything that you were doing previously to get new customers starts working less and less, right? Your CAC is going to start going up and so on and so forth. That's typically where you want to make sure that you are thinking, well, you have to sort of preempt that anyways. But that's typically the moment when you should switch into expansion mode, right? And expansion works in two different ways, right? And sometimes it's a mix of these two. But the first type of expansion is you leave the product, well, you don't leave it alone, but it's like you open it up and you make it great for more and more and more people, right? So you're sort of now going outside, you're going out of that limited narrow niche for which your product was perfect, and then you start adapting it to more and more niches, right? You're not just opening it up randomly to everybody because that's still not going to work. You're now just adding other customer types, right? Other customer profiles. The other way to expand is by staying within that niche but building more and more and more value, right? So those are the only two ways, to be honest with you. And again, you could combine them, it could start going horizontally and then start doing vertical, so now you get to a mix. But these are the only two ways for you to be able to expand.
Okay, so obviously, yes, once you get into that flattening of the acquisition curve and you expand either horizontally or vertically or both, as you just said. Is there something like expanding too early? How do you do that without spreading yourself too thin, building too much, becoming essentially one of those clunky companies you replaced in the first place, right? How do you avoid that?
Yeah, that's, well, I don't know how you avoid it. You avoid it by not doing it. It's, I guess this is one of those sort of first-time founder mistakes. We've definitely made that mistake, and, you just learn it over time. But yeah, you don't want to expand too early. It might feel like, oh my God, if we just created like this extra feature or this extra product, we would be growing our revenue so much. I think that's just completely unfocused leadership and strategy because I have a framework for myself called the scale cycle, which basically, if you can imagine like a cycle. So in the middle, you have what the company is solving for. What is the vision for the next 3 to 5 years, right? And you got to be very clear on the vision, especially when it comes to market size, right? How many customers you're working with, what is the team size, and so on. So that's really what you're solving for. So if right now I'm solving for land grab and increasing my market share, the first thing I'm going to have to do is look at my data. I'm going to measure, okay? Once I measure, I look at I could see what KPIs look bad, and those are going to be my blockers. So I now identify the blockers. Once I know my blockers, now I can sit down and come up with all kinds of ideas as to how I'm going to be able to eliminate the blocker, right? And out of all those ideas, I can narrow everything down. It's going to be 2, 3 priorities that I'm going to just move into execution. I'm going to get them done, and I'm going to come back and measure things. And so growth is this cycle, It just keeps going on and on and on. The thing that doesn't change is the thing in the middle, what you're solving for. So I think it's a matter of culture and it's a matter of leadership. Because if you as a CEO all of a sudden decide that whatever you guys did solve for until now, so for example, increasing the market share is no longer valid. Well, first of all, you have to come up with a very, very good reason for why you're shifting. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of people looking at you very confused as to, okay, why the sudden change? So being, disciplined and sort of sticking to your guns, I think that is very, very helpful. Now, of course, if the market shows you that you've sort of outgrown whatever you were solving for, okay, now you can sit down and say, okay, guys, this is no longer working. We need to grow by expanding our annual contract value, no longer our number of clients. Okay, now everybody understands. It makes sense for everyone. Okay, cool. So now let's look at the data through that lens. Okay. Mm-hmm. My KPIs are going to tell me one story if I use the sort of grow market share lens versus if I use the expand revenue per customer lens. They're going to tell me complete different stories. One of them I might even ignore while I'm growing my, the number of my customers, right? So I think that, you prevent that by just being sort of rational and consistent and disciplined as to what is the main thing, what is the main vision for 3 to 5 years that you're currently solving for, and not straying away from that. No matter how great the ideas are, you always have to ask yourself the question of, is this what we're currently solving for? How is this going to help us, right? So for example, let's say a guy, and this happened, we're in a meeting and then we were focusing obviously on increasing our market share, and somebody comes in and says, well, I've spoken to a few customers and I see that they have problems with their websites. So I think it would be a really good idea if we built a website builder for them. And we were like, okay, but does this help us increase our market share or not? No, not really. Well, okay, let's just, shelve it. It's an interesting idea. We can explore it later when we start, we will have to decide on what else we could be building for them.
Right perhaps. Now you're in gaining market share mode.
Yeah.
I see.
And this is very interesting because the question of focusing and, as you grow, there's a lot of this was a question. I'm a member of Forbes Technology Council, and there's every week there's panels that we as council members, we have to contribute with our answers. And I think this week's question, one of the questions was, as you scale, how do you keep teams focused on what matters most and, prevent them from sort of going random and squandering a lot of effort and energy? But they were asking it as if, there's some kind of a strategy or tactic there's no strategy or tactic. It's the culture. Culture starts with leadership. If you as a leader are always, used to asking this particular question, right? Does this help what we're currently solving for? If you don't, enforce that, if you don't practice it, right? And you're not creating that culture, that's not going to happen with your executives either. So it just kind of starts from you, but it's all about a certain culture of how you view things, how you approach, and your job as a leader is to tell people where to, okay? Mm-hmm. What is the direction? What are we solving for? That's the most important thing you will ever have to do. Again, when you have a full team, because sometimes you're wearing a lot of hats and, it's just
as hard to keep yourself focused, I feel, sometimes even more than somebody else. So you can just tell them to focus if you're clear, at least.
I can tell you a little bit about that, why it's hard for people to focus. So since I've exited, I have a lot more founders that I kind of, counsel and talk to and help them out. I wouldn't say coach. I don't see myself as a coach. I'm just giving them great advice. But a lot of people, and here's what happens, okay? Founders between 50K MRR and 150K MRR go through this phase, which I call the big squeeze or the pressure zone, right? It's the worst part of building a business, right? Right after you get product market fit, your revenue goes up like this, but your problems go up like this, right? Because you have more and more customers and all sorts of shit going on with customer success and support, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And founders at that point get squeezed, get overwhelmed. They're wearing a lot of hats, right? They're tired. They're confused. They don't know what to focus on and what, that is, man, I've been through that phase. It was absolutely terrible. And what happens is you get fed up with everything. Okay. You get fed up with customer success, and what you want to do is just get it off your plate completely. Okay. And then you're like just doing the worst type of mistake you can ever do is you hire a customer success manager. Can't even afford them. Right. But then when it comes to products, it's the same thing. Damn, I'm fed up with this thing. I'm fed up with this product. I'm bored. It's like the same product. And when you're in that state, what your mind is going to do is going to pop up some little idea to make you motivated and excited again. Okay. And that's what happens. And the next thing you do, you come to the office and like, all right, guys,
landing page
I had this great idea. It's going to help us. And then you bullshit yourself into why that's going to be a great idea. And it's like you tell everyone how this is going to change everything. But in reality, it's you. This is emotional, it's purely mental, and it's not objective. And so this is why I believe a great founder also has one other trait, which is called critical thinking, and the ability and to have self-awareness and the ability to investigate what they feel, what they think, what are their beliefs, what are their values, so that they don't fall prey to these impulses, But that's why people get all kinds of stupid ideas prematurely, because they're just fed up with the whole thing and just want this new thing to reignite themselves. So,
and that's where you help other founders too. You said you don't want to call yourself a coach, but you're still helping others. Is that also a thing that you do normally, or is that just is that an offering that you have, or is it just for friends?
Well, I don't currently have an offering. What I'm thinking of doing is creating a coaching program. I am actively working on that.
Cool.
To kind of give people more tools to be able to. It's basically designed to help those founders that I mentioned in that pressure zone, help them navigate, right? Because in that, when you're in between 50K and 150K in MRR, you have to develop two very, very solid skills. The first one is to focus on growing revenue and just tune everything out. And the second one is to reduce the problems that you as a founder are responsible for, right? In other words, reduce the amount of hats that you're wearing. Okay. The problem is a lot of founders make the mistake of they're not delegating, they're just abdicating, right? As I said before, they're just hiring some manager they can't afford to just get an entire team off their plate. And the reality is that in that particular phase in your growth, you have to be able to hire tactically, meaning you have to delegate the tasks that you're doing every single day while retaining the management role. Okay. Once you are able to grow revenue, right? And obviously because you're delegating the day-to-day, or obviously your problems, what you have to focus on starts dropping. At some point at 300K, 400K a month, now you can really afford A players for executives or team leads, right? But by that time, you already have the team built. You already have a process, right? And you just get the person to inherit all of that, keep it moving, and then let them improve it and enhance it and so on and so forth, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people navigate through that pressure zone, because that's where many get killed. Like there's so many ways to die in that zone. It's like in the startup phase, 90% of founders are going to fail because they just don't know how to create product and don't know how to get product market fit. But then, so imagine 100 founders going into the startup phase, first phase, okay? 90 of them, Squid Game, they all die, right? And then you're left with 10. Now in the pressure zone, 8 of those 10 are going to die, and you're left with 2. Those 2 are going to end up in the third phase, which I call smooth sailing, where you now have a system, you have a team, and you're sort of
the corporate zone,
right? Yeah, it's not really corporate, but yeah, you're kind of sailing towards that. So it's like 2 out of 100, and this is why,
Right.
And so the pressure zone, a lot of people say, yeah, we made it, we got product market fit. Bullshit, dude. You are going into the worst possible, period. So brace yourself, because it's going to be tough for you personally, as a person, as a founder, and that's what I'm trying to help them with. But again, I don't have it yet. It's going to be out there. I'm going to let you all know.
Brilliant.
I'm going to shout it from the rooftops.
In the meantime, where can people find you? Stay tuned. Wait for that. Learn about your new venture.
It's on I'm typically on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. So I just started putting a little bit more content. Like this is a bit alien to me because, while building Title Capture as a SaaS company, I didn't really have to necessarily build my personal brand. It was just like the company, you create a product, you promote it, and off you go. And ever since I exited, now I realized, oh, wait a second, if I'm going to help all these people that are where I used to be like 10 years ago, I kind of have to put myself out there, so I've just started to play this game. It's a bit alien to me, although I've done it for other people and helped other people do it. So I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, but it's just something that I'm kind of now starting to do. And it's interesting. It's exciting. I like talking by myself to the camera. But yeah, they can find me on Instagram, find me on Facebook, find me on LinkedIn. So that's pretty much it. I'm not going to go on TikTok.
I do think you'll have no shortage of advice. I think we could do this for 3 more hours, but I guess we
pick your topic.
Absolutely. Wrap up at this point. This has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much, Alex, for coming
welcome
on the show. That was such a valuable conversation with Alex. Here are my top 3 takeaways from this episode. Number 1, focus on jobs, not problems. Alex was crystal clear. People don't hire your product to solve problems, they hire it to get jobs done. Stop asking, what problems does it solve? And start asking, what job does this help people get done? 2, go narrow or go home. You need 100 people to love you, not 1 million to sort of like you. Pick one specific niche, understand their value curve, and nail every single point on it until they're saying, shut up and take my money. Anything less, and you don't have product market fit. You can always expand later, but expand too early and you're dead. And 3, the pressure zone will kill you if you're not ready. That 50K to 150K MRR range where your revenue goes up, but your problems go up even faster. 8 out of 10 founders who survive the startup phase die right here. Why? Because they get bored, overwhelmed, and chase shiny new ideas instead of staying laser focused. The only way through is ruthless focus on revenue and tactical delegation. Now, if you're a non-technical founder sitting on a SaaS idea, wondering, how do I actually build this thing? That's why we built SaaS Mastery. We help non-technical founders go from idea to launching their MVP in 2 to 6 months profitably. We've already helped all these founders do the same. If you're curious, check out the first link in the description. All right, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.